The next company presenting is IRLAB, a Swedish company focused on developing symptomatic treatments for patients living with Parkinsonism. I'll hand over the word to Nicholas Waters, who is the CEO. Nicholas, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to this opportunity. We are on a mission to transform the treatment algorithm for patients with or people with Parkinson's disease. Next slide, please. This is the disclaimer, and we can go to next slide. So what we do is basically focusing on CNS disorders, and today we have a very strong pipeline in Parkinson's disease. We have a long history of research and development within the CNS area. That's where our expertise lies. Why then we want to help these people with Parkinson's disease to a better quality of life, as simple as that. And there is a huge need in this space. How do you do that then? We have developed a proprietary discovery platform over the past 3 decades, which is highly efficient in delivering novel treatment strategies for PD and other neuropsychiatric disorders. Next, please. So we have our proprietary discovery platform, which we call the integrative screening platform. I'll come back to that. By means of this technology, we have developed today within IRLAB 2 first-in-class compounds, which are in phase 2B stage right now, basically. Mesdopetam and Pirepemat. And then we have developed a preclinical pipeline, which we are now moving forward towards phase 1. And we're listed on Stockholm Nasdaq on the main market since last fall. Next, please. PD is the second largest neurodegenerative disorder known to man. And it's basically in a pandemic phase right now where there'll be a doubling in the diagnosed patients in the coming 15 to 20 years. We have roughly 9 million patients diagnosed, and this is likely one of the more underdiagnosed disorders. And the projections are that we'll have 16, 17, 18 million patients within 2040. This has to do with the elderly population across the globe, but also increased number of diagnoses across certain regions, especially in Asia. This is a very costly disorder. There has been different estimates of the annual cost for treatments, but one looks at the aggregated cost for the US, it's around $52 billion a year to take care of patients suffering from Parkinson's disease. Next, please. Taking a little bit a helicopter view on the progression of the disorder and how we want to address the different complications. Parkinson's disease is a quite well-known disorder to most people. And the most well-known symptoms are the slowness of movements, the stiffness, and that occur directly after diagnosis or are coinciding with diagnosis. Actually, the diagnosis of PD is dependent on those symptoms occurring. By then, dopamine neurons in the brain have deteriorated to such a degree that you get those symptoms. However, with PD, there are a number of other complications during the course of the disease. Later on, after 5 to 7 years of disorder of the disease progression, and with treatment of levodopa, which is the medication all patients receive from start, basically. Dyskinesia occurs, which are involuntary movements, quite violent and sometimes painful. Poorly controlled today. Later on in the disorder, balance problems occur, and which leads to falls, but also psychiatric symptoms such as psychosis, apathy, and depression. And we have looked carefully at this and decided to focus on a number of these additional problems during the course of the disease. So with mesdopetam, we are treating the psychiatric and the dyskinesia, some of the psychiatric problems and dyskinesia. With the pirepemat and P001 program, we are addressing the cognitive decline, but also the falls, apathy, and perhaps also the depression in these patients. And then for the early motor symptoms, we are looking at the program which we call P003. Next slide, please. So this is the current pipeline. We have two programs, one study ongoing in phase 2b, so two programs in mid-phase 2 studies, phases, and a number of programs approaching phase 1 right now. And I mentioned P003, which is a program where we're looking at finding new treatments for the early stages of or just after a diagnosis instead of levodopa. Long-acting molecules which could prevent or actually treat the early symptoms, such as the tremors and the stiffness. And then the P001 and pirepemat programs are addressing the cognitive decline with pirepemat as the spearhead here. These represent totally novel treatment classes, new types of treatment strategies for this disorder. And then mesdopetam at the top, which is right now in an international phase 2b study. And quite recently, we entered into a collaboration with Ipsen through a licensing deal. Next, please. We use our discovery platform, the ISP platform, published a couple of years ago. It's based on the collection which we have been engaged in for the large part of 3 decades. We have collected data on all known chemical classes acting on the CNS, including our own experimental compounds and synthesis. This helps us to, this database helps us to design molecules and test molecules and choose new treatment strategies for these disorders. It's a highly efficient system with a high likelihood of successful phase transitions as compared to industry standard. Next, please. The deal with Ipsen is worth a couple of words, actually. We embarked on a phase 2b study. We started that last fall, late December. The first patients were included. And during the spring, we started discussing with a number of potential partners collaboration around the preparation and the conduction of the phase 3 studies. We entered into a licensing deal in mid-July with Ipsen. It's a French-based company, but with UK and US, high UK and US presence. This is a global company marketing neuro drugs on the global market with a broad outreach to our focused patients, actually. They obtain an exclusive worldwide license to develop and commercialize mesdopetam. They will finance all for future development and commercialization. In addition, they of course pay us an upfront milestones and royalties for the license. So from now on, our primary program, mesdopetam, is fully financed through this license. We will be responsible for completion of the phase 2b study at IRLAB. Next slide, please. Financially, the deal is worth $363 million plus royalties on worldwide sales. We actually have received $28 million up front, and there are another $335 million in potential development milestones, regulatory milestones, and sales-based milestones, including double-digit royalties. So this is a very significant deal. It's, according to our analysis, one of the largest deals in Scandinavia in the past 20 years, and likely the largest phase 2 deal that has been struck. Next, please. Looking at the ongoing study with mesdopetam, this is a study we initiated last year. As I said, we have a target of 140 patients, 3 doses, a placebo-controlled study, 3-month treatment. So this extends what we've done before. We've done 1-month studies so far. We are recruiting in the US and Europe. The primary objective here is to reduce dyskinesia, and that is measured as good on time. That is the daily hours with good motor function. And then we are looking also at other aspects of symptomatology in this study, but the primary endpoint is the good on time. Next, please. I should mention that we are targeting 3 hours of improvement here, which is about twice as much as has been published by any other experimental treatment before. Besides the levodopa-induced dyskinesias or improvement of good on time from a motor perspective, there are other expansion possibilities with mesdopetam. Among those is psychosis in Parkinson's disease, PDP, which is a similarly large indication, has a healthy market. About 1.5 million people globally right now are suffering from psychosis in PD. Mesdopetam is as efficient or more efficient than other programs in this space. Preclinically, I should say. We haven't done any clinical studies yet. There is also a possibility to expand use into tardive dyskinesia, which is also dependent on the target molecule for mesdopetam. That's the dopamine D3 receptor. Next, please. There is potential for quite large growth in the use of mesdopetam once on the market. Switching gears to our other program, pirepemat program, which is in transition now from phase 2A to phase 2B. This is a molecule we discovered by means of our ISP system, and it has a very specific pharmacology. It activates certain regions of the cortical brain, in the frontal lobes of the brain. And this is the region which is affected in the late-stage Parkinson. Around 50% of all patients with PD today have balance problems. And this is correlated to the cognitive decline, which leads to impaired balance and falls. And these falls are often very violent. People with PD don't often recognize when they fall, so these are violent falls. And they often lead to hospitalization, which is quite expensive. And studies have shown that one such fall costs around $30,000 to treat in the US. So there is a quite large market here, an untapped market. We are first in the global pipeline right now with a program within this indication area. Next, please. So as I said, pirepemat is designed to improve balance and cognitive function. It acts through inhibition of at least 2 targets, 5-HT7 and alpha-2 receptors, in the frontal lobes of the brain, which enhances neurotransmission in those regions and supports cognitive and balance mechanisms. And there is a huge number of patients who actually fall, but there are even more patients who are suffering from what is called fear of falling, which is being afraid of falling makes you sit still and do nothing, basically. And this is a problem for these patients and the families. Next, please. So the problems associated with cognitive decline and falling, they occur when patients do the transition from what's called stage 2 to stage 3 on a certain scale defining the severeness of PD, Hoehn-Yahr scale, I should say. And as I mentioned, 50% of all patients are in these stages right now. And pirepemat, when introduced into the treatment algorithm, pirepemat could provide reduced falls, improvement of cognitive functions, and then reduced apathy as well. We saw some signs of both cognitive improvement and reduced apathy in our phase 2A study. Next, please. In that study, on the right-hand panel here, we also saw a quite significant reduction in the, or important reduction in falling in patients defined as fallers. So 50% reduction, and a clinically meaningful reduction would be around 25% according to international publications. So this is twice as good as what is required in the phase 2A study. The study that we are planning now to start is based on falls as the primary endpoint outcome measure. We will also look at cognitive endpoints, the MoCA scale, the UPDRS scale, which is the common Parkinson's scale, of course, and also look at apathy, which is a very common symptom in these patients and hampers their daily life. Next, please. So to date, we have delivered on our business strategy. Basically, we have now the opportunity with the deal with Ipsen. We now have the opportunity to expand the development around the pirepemat program, the P001 program, to make that a success. We also have additional preclinical candidates, which we will bring forward into phase 1 studies. And of course, continue on the growth path, which we started last year in the company. We have been recruiting and we are expanding our capabilities within AI to support the ISP, including data analysis of various kinds, but also in the R&D and in the market aspects of, or marketing aspects of drug development. And we continue the work towards new revenue generating transactions, of course. Next, please. So this is our vision of growth. We have now built what we call the foundation for a number of transformative treatments in PD, potentially transformative treatments in patients during the first years of operations. And by mid-20s, 25, 26, we expect to see some of our assets being very close or even in NDA situations, drug applications. So, and in that time, we also expect to grow the company and expand even further. Next, please. So what we believe are the key attributes for an investor when it comes to IRLAB is the now validated research platform. We have a number of assets actually in the global pipeline based on our discovery platform, 2 of them within IRLAB, mesdopetam and pirepemat. The quite unusual situation with a fully financed development and commercialization of one of our assets as mesdopetam through the license. This means actually that we will not have to spend more kronor or dollars ourselves on this program. It's fully financed. And both mesdopetam and pirepemat have been designated first-in-class compounds by WHO. These are the first representatives in 2 new CNS classes, which is quite unusual. And we have a very strong IPR strategy and IPR portfolio supporting exclusivity into the 40s for our main programs. And as we can see, we are 4 to 5 years ahead in the global pipeline, at least with these treatment strategies. Next, please. So, thank you very much. That's the brief presentation of IRLAB.
Great, thank you very much, Nicholas, for that presentation. Very interesting. We have ample time for a few questions. So, first thing that I noted in your presentation. You said you were targeting 3 hours improvement in good on time, which seems quite ambitious goal. Do you have a sense of what would be considered clinically meaningful or enough for the trial to be considered a success? Both kind of in your view, and is there any kind of alignment with regulators on what you would need to demonstrate in terms of good on-time improvement for a potential approval?
Look back in history, so there are a number of treatments which are added on to levodopa, the basic treatment in Parkinson's disease, to improve motor function, not necessarily reducing dyskinesia, but just improving good on time. And their regulators have accepted 30 minutes to 60 minutes improvement in on time on a daily basis. So 1 hour is good. If one looks at specific attempts of reducing dyskinesia as a means of improving good on, around 1.5 hours is what can be achieved and has been accepted as well by regulators. So we are aiming high with the 3 hours, but even if we hit 2 hours, that is clearly meaningful and very valuable to the patients. What I didn't mention here is also that with mesdopetam, we see this improvement. Actually, we see more than 3 hours at an optimal dose in our phase 2a study. We don't see any complicating side effects. So this is a benefit without a price, basically, for the patients, which also has to go into the consideration when you talk to the regulators.
And is the study sufficiently powered to show statistical significance with, say, a 1 hour improvement or a 2 hour improvement, or?
Not 1 hour, but with 2 hours, yes.
Okay, alrighty. And in terms of secondary endpoints, if for whatever reason there was not a significant improvement on good and good on time extension, could there be kind of secondary endpoints that could be sufficiently clinically meaningful to allow you to progress?
Absolutely. We are administering a number of scales measuring the function of these patients, and 3 scales actually addressing, or 3 different scales addressing dyskinesia. So that's common in this field. You have to do it. Regulators expect those, and let's say that we clock in on 2, but not the 3rd one. That's fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I've seen you've got quite long IP rights, longer than would be typical for a company at this stage. But perhaps a tricky question, I'm sure one that you've gotten in the past, and it gets to the question of kind of how vulnerable mesdopetam is to kind of potential improvements in the standard of care in the time until you reach the market or before your IP rights would have expired, if there's kind of a new disease-modifying treatment or an improved formulation of levodopa that kind of renders mesdopetam less relevent. What can you say around that?
Start at the end there with the improvement of levodopa, and there have been there is ongoing, and there has been ongoing for the past 40 years basically, attempts to improve the usefulness of levodopa. There has been incremental improvements. There are a number of actually important steps forward, such as duodopa, which came out of Sweden. But these are complicated treatments which usually require surgery. With oral administration of levodopa or otherwise non-invasive administrations of levodopa, everything has been tried. And there are improvements in the number of tablets you take per day, etc. But it's the limit has been reached, basically. When it comes to disease-modifying treatments, there have been a number of attempts in the past years addressing some of the neurobiological phenomena which coincides with the symptoms of PD. At present, there is no study which has shown consistent improvements for these patients, consistent That I mean consistent functional improvement for these patients. And a number of programs have been stopped recently. So from a competitive perspective, in that sense, we don't see that as a big issue. Of course, should a treatment which, for instance, stops the development PD appear, that would change the market, of course. But that I view that as something in the future, a long time in the future.
Sure. And a question on when in the treatment course mesdopetam is intended to be used. Some patients will delay levodopa until later in their disease in order to kind of push back the development of levodopa-induced dyskinesias. When is mesdopetam meant to be started, I guess?
Very interesting question, actually. What we have been doing in our early clinical development here is looking at the acute effect of mesdopetam on dyskinesia, and we can see a very clear-cut reduction of the symptoms. In January, we published some new data indicating that co-treatment from the beginning, basically, with mesdopetam could actually prevent the occurrence of levodopa.
Right.
So that's a secondary line of development for this strategy, this molecule, and that is actually to prevent levodopa-induced dyskinesia. We don't have any clinical data on that yet, but we are building the preclinical documentation around this phenomenon, which in that case would expand the use of mesdopetam significantly. Okay, great. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. So, Nicholas Waters, CEO of IRLAB, thank you very much for an interesting presentation and an interesting Q&A. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the rest of the day.